Good day to all participants of the 15th De La Salle Arts Congress, Reimagining the Arts in the Post-Pandemic Recovery. This is Mr. Jose Ale Nasria from De La Salle College of St. Benilde, and allow me to read or present to you the salient points of my research entitled The Antipolo Shrine, Pilgrimage Traditions, Innovations, and the Call of the New Normal. First, I would like to give you an overview of the Antipolo Shrine. So it's like, that's why I entitled this slide, The Antipolo Shrine in a Nutshell. So for those who are not familiar with this particular place of worship, allow me to give you an overview of its unique nature as compared to other shrines and other places of worship in the Philippines. The National Shrine of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage is one of the oldest and most prominent Marian sanctuaries in the Philippines. It is not necessarily the oldest, okay? But it's one of the shrines that has been well known as a place where you keep an image of a virgin of predilection, recorded as way back as the early 17th early 17th century. Okay, so just like any other shrine, it contains an object of devotion. So I'm speaking here of the Catholic context. The object of devotion in the Antipolo Shrine is the canonically crowned miraculous image of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage, also known as the Virgin of Antipolo. And it has been venerated in the Philippines since 1626. Now, the image itself, it was venerated in a particular parish in Acapulco, Mexico. And it was only much later that it was given the title Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage. And this is in reference to her trans-Pacific voyages aboard the Manila galleons. Okay, so technically speaking, the image that you see on the screen is an image of the Virgin Mary as the Immaculate Conception. But of course, popular piety has ascribed to her other titles as well. She is Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage, and as well as the Virgin of Antipolo. Just to correct some erroneous notions, Antipolo was already a community, so technically it has always been there. So it is not the town that was named after the Virgin of Antipolo. The town is more likely named after the tree itself. But definitely that the community wherein the shrine is located has existed even before the arrival of this miraculous image. Now, the functional dynamics of this particular shrine is interesting. This church is unique since it is a trifunctional sacred space. It is a diocesan cathedral since it is the seat of the bishop of the Diocese of Antipolo, which corresponds to the province of Rizal and portions of the greater Manila area or the National Capital Region. It is also a parish church. That's why we call it the Parish of the Immaculate Conception. And it is also a National Marian Shrine of the Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage, the very first of its kind in the Philippines. And when you say it's a National Marian Shrine, there is this recognition of its importance, spiritual significance to the Filipino nation as a whole. And to be the first to be given this particular honor means that the people of the Philippines have all considered this particular image as the representative virgin of predilection, the representative icon of both their nation, their culture, and their spirituality or religiosity. Unknown to many, the petition, I guess most of people, particularly pious ones, are very particular with canonical coronation, that particular ritual wherein you recognize the spiritual and cultural historical value of a particular image. We do well know that the very first image to be canonically crowned in the Philippines is that of the Dominican Our Lady of Landabal, but the first initiative, the first initiative to have a canonical coronation in the Philippines was way back in the early 1900s. I believe it is 1905. Probably some people can correct me with that. And it's a petition to crown Our Lady of Antipolo, being the most popular image in the Philippines right at that time. So it has been a centuries old pilgrimage site. Since the mid-17th century, the shrine is the focal point of a massive pilgrimage tradition now known as Pag-ahon. Now, which means to climb or to go up. Now, many people are asking, why is it called to climb or to go up or Pag-ahon? Now, it goes back to that particular period in history wherein Antipolo was really at a foothill, meaning people would say it's the mountain, and the city of Manila is far from it. So before you could actually go to Antipolo, you have to pass through the Pasig River. Then from the Pasig River, you have to climb a mountain or a foothill, if it's appropriate to use the term, to reach the shrine of Our Lady. And that is why they call it Pag-ahon, because it's not easy to go up in Antipolo. So normally there's a specific season to go about that eventually developed into the well-known traditional season of pilgrimage or pilgrimage season or Pag-ahon of Antipolo, which lasts between May to around July of 2021. Now, what you see now is the classical model of a Marian pilgrimage. So what do you mean by the classical model of a Marian pilgrimage? Now, it's like this. When we talk about the classical model, we have to dissect its elements. At the very center of this particular Marian pilgrimage is obviously an object of devotion, probably a representation of an apparition or a miraculous image. In this case, since this is a traditionally classical shrine, the point of reference or the focal point of all the action will be an object of devotion. And that object of devotion is the image of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage, which I discussed earlier. And this image, together with its ritual heads and guardians, which in the Catholic context would be the priests, lay ministers, other members of the church authorities or church organizations, etc., will always be the ones to operate inside the sanctuary. So in the Catholic context, there's always a sanctuary. It can be a big church or a chapel, including its immediate environs or grounds. So that is the holy sanctuary or sacred space. And within it, you have the object of devotion or the ritual heads. And normally during peak seasons, the sacred space is extended to include the whole town or probably the whole place, the whole city where the shrine is located. And so from May to July, the whole of Antipolo becomes what we call an extended ritual space. And the idea of extending it is to accommodate this tidal wave of devotees that would come to the sacred space in an act of collective pilgrimage. So what differentiates a classical model of a Marian pilgrimage from, say, an urban model of a pilgrimage is this? When you talk about an urban model of pilgrimage, it does not entail much effort to travel, and there is not necessarily a particular season for you to perform the ritual or the collective pilgrimage. A good example in the Philippines would be the Baclaran Shrine, the national shrine of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. That redemptorist shrine is not classical in the sense that you can go there every Wednesday. Okay? To some extent, the Other shrines that are like that would be the shrines, national shrines here in Manila, like there is this shrine of Our Lady of the Rosary, although there is Alanaval rites in October, but generally speaking, you can go to Santo Domingo or any other shrine regularly. In the case of the classical model, this is more akin to the ones observed, say, in Lourdes or in San Juan de los Lagos, in Guadalupe, in Fatima, all the Black Madonnas of France. And the idea here is that there is the sanctuary is very distant, and devotees would prepare for a specific season wherein they would collectively go to that particular sanctuary, which is normally kilometers away. And this act of walking or traveling to that sanctuary is in itself an act of ritual or an act of prayer already. Now, one of the unique things about the classical model of the Marian pilgrimage is that the devotees cannot do it in any other shrine, which means that you cannot have a branch of the shrine. For example, we have here the sanctuary of Our Lady of Antipolo. You cannot have branches of it so that you could do it in other places in the country. There is only one Antipolo. There's only one national shrine of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage. There are parish churches, but the collective pilgrimage, the massive pilgrimage, will always be an Antipolo because this involves the entry into a sacred realm. So from the devotees are from a secular realm. They make a pilgrimage, walk to it until they enter Antipolo. And the act of entering Antipolo, but more so entering the shrine, is what we call now the penetration or entry into what we call an inner sanctuary or a ritual space. And it is inside this particular space that one can actually perform the rituals and other performances that are offered to Our Lady. The ritual performances of a classical model of a Marian pilgrimage are normally exhibiting four major qualities. Number one, there is constant movement. Okay. One thing that is interesting about the classical model is that movement is essential. There are processions, there are pilgrimages, walks. So there's this constant flux of movement that characterizes the pilgrimage. Second, it is visually impressive. And when you say visually impressive, it is colorful, it is filled with loud colors and sights. So when you notice this, you would see that it's visually impressive, okay? And it's filled with so many decors and pageantry, which, Filipinos are very good at. It's emotive and tactile. There is a certain emotion involved in it. And just like any other action of a Filipino piety, it's very tactile. So when you say it's very tactile, it touches everything. And in the Philippines, the idea of touching a holy object is very, very important. Because even before Christianity came, there is this notion of that the touch is an act of worship or an act of veneration, wherein the power of the object is transferred to the person, and eventually that person would transfer it to other people who are in need of help or healing. And so this tactile action is not just limited to just touching the Virgin Mary or kissing the mantle of the Virgin Mary. It also includes, among other things, holding candles, okay, the use of water in blessing. All of these things are tactile because it can be felt by the senses. And finally, a classical model of a Marian pilgrimage have a tendency to be both penitential and celebratory at the same time, which means that there are people who would do it penitentially, and so it requires a certain suffering. requires a sacrifice or penance, but at the same time, it's celebratory, which means it's a happy thing. It's happy. It can be even, some, particularly when younger people are involved, it is very lively, funny, it's fun, it's rowdy at times, but it is also penitential. Though, of course, you cannot compare it, say, with the actions in Quiapo, which is quite different. It's an entirely different phenomenon. But there is the same spirit of celebration, of fiesta, in the classical model of a Marian pilgrimage. And I think among the Marian pilgrimages in the Philippines, two really qualify for this classical model. I'm speaking here of Our Lady of Manawag Shrine and that of the Shrine of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage. There might be others, but I don't have time to discuss the rest of the other shrines. I focus only on the Antipolo Shrine. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So it's very, very important why the reason why I spend much time on this paradigm is because this thing, this classical model will be challenged by the very pandemic that is the theme of this particular conference. Now, the ritual performances of the Pag-ahon are many and complex. But what I did here is that I simplified the ritual performances in a paradigm or conceptual framework so that you could understand what goes on in Antipolo during the pilgrimage season. So technically, the Pag-ahon opens on the first Tuesday of May, which is the solemnity of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage. Normally, this happens with a procession and mass towards Pinagmisahan Hill, one of the highest points of Antipolo, where in the past, the image of the Virgin Mary was placed there so as to abate a certain epidemic. I'm not sure if this is the cholera pandemic of 1882, but there's no clear indication as to which pandemic or which epidemic during the Spanish era are they referring to, because there are several of them. Okay, and after that, the pandemic ended. And so, very appropriately, they opened the mass at Pinagmisahan Hill. Okay. Another thing that I do remember about Pinagmisahan Hill is that it's also offered to somehow ask for, if I'm not mistaken, to ask for peace in the Antipolo area at a time when the path or the road to Antipolo is virtually occupied by bandits and other criminal elements. So they were asking for the conversion and peace so that people can progress through their pilgrimage without any problem. So that is the start of that tradition. So it starts with an opening mass at Pinagmisaan Hill, another mass there in Antipolo, and this would start the cycle of novena masses. So when you say novena, you have 9 masses. So you have 7 cycles of that, so 9 times 7. Okay, so that's from the first Tuesday of May, and because of mathematics, or because of a fixed calendar, it ends always on the first Tuesday of July. So there are 7 cycles of novena masses to Our Lady of Antipolo. The novena proper, or text, is embedded or interwoven into the Holy Eucharist itself. Although there are texts of the novena independent of the Mass, in general, it is still the Mass that is considered more important, meaning the Holy Eucharist being the highest form of prayer that it could offer to God from the Catholic context. And it would end with the closing Mass and the procession, closing Mass and procession, or probably the grandest one of the pilgrimage season. And this is on the first Tuesday of July. So there is this, how do you call this? There is this notion that the ritual performance of the pilgrimage season is just May, because it's normally associated with what they call the Maytime festivities, but actually it lasts until July. And the purpose of this is to accommodate as many devotees as possible. Because in the old days, when you go up to Antipolo, there are no hotels, there are no facilities. It's very difficult to actually go up there. So people maximize their time. They stay there for 9 days, complete the whole novena so that they could go down to Manila or whatever province they came from. And that's the reason why they extended it to 7 cycles. Now, once this pilgrimage season is ongoing, all the people who have organized pilgrimages, particularly communal pilgrimages, have to follow the following. Now, on the road rituals, normally now that we have roads there, you have a long walk or a bike ride or a convoy to the shrine. And in general, you are allowed to pray any form of prayer. Sometimes you could bring an image of the Virgin with you. There you can pray the rosary, or if you're coming from the EDSA shrine, you can actually pray what we call the rosary stations, wherein you have the 20 mysteries of the rosary with markers, okay? And these are spread all over the road, okay, from Pasig, from the Pasig Mandaluyong, Pasig area, onwards to Cainta and Taytay and Antipolo. And so you are walking, and in the stations, you would make stops so that you could perform rituals in front of the marker of the mysteries. Okay. Now, the core ritual itself will always be the Divina Masses, and it's very, very clear. The Masses, as described by the rector, it's like just having Sunday, meaning Sunday being the full schedule. A Sunday is the busy day for priests because you have Mass from morning to evening, hour per hour. So can you imagine having a Sunday schedule every day for roughly what? Okay. 63, almost 63 days. Okay. So if you look at this is a very tiring period for most of the priests there, but they have to do that because they have to accommodate the thousands, if not millions of people who are going to the Pag-ahon in Antipolo. Now, there are optional rituals within the sacred space, and these optional rituals include a concluding procession for each novena. If you can participate in it, why not? Okay, a procession of the replicas, rosaries and private novenas outside the Mass. The pahalik, this is very, very important for most people. I've told you, very tactile. Kissing the mantle of the Virgin, lighting of candles, and blessing of vehicles and religious articles. All of these happening simultaneously during the pilgrimage season. Of course, we have secular practices. I won't call them as rituals, such as buying cashew nuts, buying mangoes and suman. Those are more of souvenir buying activities as well. Well, it's part of the tradition, but it is not necessarily a ritual in a sacred sense. So we could set that aside. So this is how complex a ritual performance is. The question now is, what happens to this complex ritual performance when confronted by something that is directly the opposite of it? The pandemic and the pilgrimage tradition. Now, as we all know, by 2020, the Philippines, in a negative way, we joined the COVID-19 bandwagon. So the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its consequent restrictions challenges the core character of Antipolo's pilgrimage tradition. The consequences of pandemic is the direct opposite of what the Antipolo tradition stands for. The Antipolo tradition represents physical mobility. Even the Virgin is associated with movement. She's moving around. She's the Virgin of voyage, of mobility. It is known for tactile piety. Everything is touchy. Your piety involves all your senses, and it's a communal celebration. It's a fiesta-like celebration. And then all of a sudden, COVID-19 came. with its emphasis on social distancing, quarantines, and what have you, which are obviously the antithesis of the fiesta, or or the pilgrimage season, if I could use that term. So against all odds, the National Shrine of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage managed to keep the spirit of the Pag-ahon alive for the past 2 years. That they managed to do so is a testament to Filipino ingenuity, creativity, and artistry. Now, my paper, or this working paper, delves deeper on how the Antipolo Shrine reimagined the Pag-ahon seasons of 2020 and 2021 as a response to the limitations imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it is worth reflecting upon whether the innovations of the past two new normal pilgrimage seasons are simply temporary, or will these continue on beyond the pandemic? Let's go first with the shrine's response to the extraordinary pilgrimage season of 2020. Allow me to just show to you the basic points. The extraordinary pilgrimage season of 2020 is one of caution and prudence. And I think this is understandable because in 2020, we still don't know the enemy. We don't know what is COVID-19. We don't know much as to how what are its dynamics as a virus. So what happens is everybody is very, very afraid, very cautious. And I think from the point of view of the shrine, they don't want to be blamed as spearheading what they call a super spreader event. So better be cautious, better follow IATF rules, better to be responsible as long as public health concerns is involved. So the reaction of the shrine is mostly following what other places of worship did at the time. So first, there's restricted access to the object of veneration. A good example, the Camarin of the Virgin is closed to the public from May to July, I think even beyond, depending on the ebb and flow of the pandemic, no? So, but in the season of the May to July 2020 season, the Pahalik ritual was virtually impossible for very obvious reasons. No? You cannot kiss a manto and let others kiss it for obvious reasons. So the Camarin itself is closed. There is also restricted access to the main sacred spaces. So the church itself is closed to the public. The ritual spaces such as Pinagmesahan Hill, etc., are closed to the public. Pilgrimages that are collective in nature, meaning groups or hundreds or thousands of people in one group, are not allowed following IATF policies. And this is especially true with the first 5 months of the pandemic in the Philippines. Well, novena masses, the rosary, and other devotional services were held sans the public. Well, for obvious reasons, you cannot have masses and all these public gatherings. So the people who are left in the shrine are basically the rector, the resident priests, and a small in-house team of youth volunteers. But apart from that, nobody's allowed inside the church proper. So they are kind of a motley crew, a very small group of people who were left to work there. And they also have to follow all the protocol because we're very, very careful to have COVID-19 inside the shrine. And these services are live streamed, and this is where the changes entered the picture. In general, the church in the Philippines had shied away from social media for quite a time until recently. And it's very good that the Shrine of Antipolo had already all the equipments. So by the time the pandemic entered the picture, they are ready. The only thing that needs to be done is to learn how to do the stuff. And this is where the younger people enter the picture. So the youth come to the rescue, and eventually, although they already have an official Facebook and YouTube account, the level of, shall I say, the technology, the level of the production improved a lot during this period. And because there is no other way for them to to connect with the public, with the devotees, than through these social media platforms. So what are the observed dynamics of the 2020 pilgrimage season? The first one, it seems that the shrine defers to IATF and LGU rules and protocol. As the director has specified, he doesn't want to give headaches to the mayor, the city mayor, primarily because what's the point of insisting to continue on with acts of piety that have been traditional if in the process you will be, putting the issue of public health in line. So they just follow the rules obediently, okay? And the youth comes to the rescue. Here, one can see the dynamism of younger people being the ones who are more familiar with gadgets. So they became a strong force in keeping the shrine in touch with the needs of their quarantine devotees. Because I'm not saying that the priesthood are not in touch with it, but we need younger people. The youth had become, how do you call this? They had become a driving force. They are people who inspire the priests and other members of church authorities to think outside the box. And with their go-go attitude, the Antipolo team has become more experimental with podcasts and other programs. So they have accepted that the youth groups will be essential because it is proven in previous papers that were delivered in the last Lasallian Congress that social media is not just a powerful channel, it is an alternative sacred space. And that devotion is not constricted in space. So your love for the Virgin Mary is not entirely dependent on space, that you have to go to Antipolo to show her love for her. Because in a deeper sense, the love to the Virgin Mary can continue even without the space itself. One will notice also that the festal pageantry were gone. Okay, it's all austerity and simplicity in keeping with the signs of the times. Okay, so most of the ritual performances are very, very bare, stripped of the usual festal pageantry. And because you cannot move around, because you are just stuck there, and because the devotees are also stuck in their respective houses, there is an opportunity now to emphasize the interiority of devotion. Deprived of all the exterior elements of the usual pilgrimage, the shrine somehow developed this internal looking stance that the focus more is on the deeper meaning of the actions, which we could not do at this moment. So the emphasis on the messages during the pilgrimage season is, let us try to look at within. What is the reason why we are doing all these traditions to begin with? The interiority, the motive, the spirit of the devotion became the focal point more than the externals of the devotion itself, which cannot be done properly, physically, because of the pandemic. Okay? Now let's go with the historical pilgrimage season of 2021. I use the term both historic, which means that this is a first, and historical, which means there seems to be an emphasis on history for 2021. So it is actually correct. So I purposely use the term the historic and the historical pilgrimage season of 2021. Compared to the previous year, we now know the enemy. We know what COVID-19 is. We know its ebb and flow. We know already what to do. By that time, I believe there's already talk of the vaccine. So people already knew what to do. They know how COVID-19 works. And therefore, people are now more confident that they can move around, of course, with caution, without fear of getting infected. Of course, you have to be very prudent. And in the case of the shrine of the Virgin of Antipolo, they continued on being very prudent. Again, they are very, very cooperative with regards to IATF and LGU rules. One thing they've noticed is that there's already controlled access. Instead of restricted, there's already controlled access to the object of devotion. Depending on the ebb and flow of the COVID-19 cases in NCR+, no? People can go closer to the original image. They can open the camarin, pass through her, but pass beside, okay, her shrine, but sans any pahalik or manto, discouraging any touching. The gaze is more important now than the touch. Okay, and the same phenomenon is also experienced in Quiapo. I think Father Earl Mendoza just delivered a paper on that we have to be content with gazing at the Virgin because we are at a time wherein the tactile nature somehow cannot be done for obvious reasons. Okay, now they also allowed entry in church to a limited number of devotees. You could see in the picture that there are people attending Mass, the Novena Masses, but they are fewer because you're only allowed a certain capacity, I believe 30%. So because of that, 10 to 30%. And because of that, now including social distancing, the amount of people that you could contain inside the church is really very, very limited. So very, very few can actually participate in the pilgrimage season of 2021. Okay, sacred ritual field was expanded to include the grounds of the shrine and a small portion of P. Oliveris Street, which is still, I believe, church property. So technically, they, from being bound inside the gates of the church, they expanded to the whole property, and even that small portion of P. Oliveris Street leading to the to McDonald's. Okay, but however, they stopped there. And they could no longer, they find it prudent not to go beyond and go direct straight to P. Oliveros and the town proper because, processions are not yet allowed. So there are more Novena Masses, the Rosary, and other devotional services. They are held with limited audience because of IATF rules, okay, but they're held. But even though there is now a public involved, the services are still live streamed via social media platforms, which means because of the limited, shall I say, capacity of the church, they have no other choice but to go to the social media in order to view or to participate into these particular rituals. So the pilgrimage season is similar to that of 2020 in a sense that they are dependent also on Facebook and YouTube accounts. Now, what's interesting about the historical pilgrimage season of 2021 is the concept of the reversed pilgrimage. Now, because of the demands of the new normal, the shrine adopted the practice of the reversed pilgrimage model. In this, in contrast to the classical tradition where there is always a community that has to visit a sanctuary containing an image of the Virgin, now the Virgin has to go out of her sanctuary to visit her people. We call this a reversed pilgrimage. Okay, so a good example would be the motorcade around the city of Antipolo, which they normally do at the end of every novena cycle. So a replica image of is placed on something like a Pope mobile, okay, and it travels around the streets of the pilgrimage city. So I think it's safer because when you look at the motorcade, it is not necessarily a procession. So there is not much crowding. It's fast moving. And the idea is really to allow the people not to go out and touch the Virgin because she is encased in glass, but to encourage the people to at least open their windows and gaze at her. So again, there is a shift from the idea of touching the Virgin to just gazing at the Virgin, which is very much associated with Eastern Catholic practices. So we just gaze, but the gaze itself is already a form of prayer, a form of devotion. Okay, so the motorcade is not about processing it with the people because the people cannot get out. If you watch the motorcades in Antipolo during the season, the streets are practically empty, but the people are out in the windows, in their doors, praying. So there is participation, but not in the usual organic sense. Another would be and I think it's more important to emphasize this, the biyahe sa kasaysayan extraordinary pilgrimage, which means that I think this is very ingenious on the part of the Antipolo Shrine. It's a reverse pilgrimage with a marked historical twist. Somehow, the shrine decided we can get out because it is now allowed by the motorcades are allowed by the IATF, and there's no problem with social distancing because most of the areas that will be visited are areas within the NCR Plus, which basically follows the same protocol. So what happened is that they decide to go on pilgrimage on selected churches and Marian sanctuaries with historical ties or is associated with the Virgin of Antipolo. So I'm speaking here of, say, Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage shrines in Tondo, the parish there, or the Manila Cathedral, or Cavite, or the Shrine of Our Lady of the Candles in Silang. All of these sanctuaries are intimately connected with the shrine and the image in Antipolo. So in doing so, the biyahe sa kasaysayan affirmed the common spirit and historical ties that binds Marian shrines in the Philippines together. You know, it can be very frustrating because for some people, there's always a competition between the shrine. Oh, we prefer the shrine over the shrine. Oh, we're Bicolanos, we prefer Our Lady of Peña Francia. Or I'm a Caviteño, I prefer the Our Lady of Solitude and Our Lady of Solitude of Portabaga. I think to take away that kind of feeling that there is a competition between shrines, I think this biyahe sa kasaysayan somehow affirms this commonality, this bond, that they are not in competition, but they are united by a common devotion to the Virgin Mary. They might have different emphasis, they might have different cultures at all, but nevertheless, they are united in venerating one mother who is the mother of all Filipinos. And I think I personally like this stuff. And at the end of each pilgrimage, the Antipolo Shrine leaves an official replica to that particular shrine for the people to venerate. So they brought Antipolo to those particular places, which I think for me is a stroke of genius. Okay? Now, there are other events. For some reason, the pilgrimage season of that period, 2021, also became the time frame wherein Antipolo was was chosen to host a historic first. And that is the Global Rosary Marathon for an end to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this was initiated by Pope Francis himself at the height of the Delta variant upsurge in India. So at that time, they chose 30 shrines all over the world. And out of the 30, there are only 5 shrines in Asia that were qualified to host such an event. I think there's one in Lebanon, Our Lady of Lebanon, Our Lady of Velankani in India, Our Lady of the Rosary in Korea, Our Lady of Nagasaki in Nagasaki, obviously, and of course, the Virgin of Peace and Good Voyage in Antipolo. And I believe there's another one I think there are 6 because there is one that is a last addition on, I think it's a shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes in Myanmar, because at that time, Myanmar was also undergoing some political crisis. So they included Myanmar. So I think it's not just 5, but 6 shrines are from Asia. But the most prominent is the one in the Philippines. Obviously, the Philippines being the largest Catholic country in this part of the world. Now, it's interesting to note that there were questions whether can we host this or not, because there are demands that you could beam live. And so dynamic and young SOCOM teams plus some very generous lay benefactors helped the shrine to beam the event live on May 7, 2021. And I've seen the whole thing, I've seen the 30 shrines. And I think personally that the the hosting or the of the marathon by Antipolo is at par with other major sanctuaries like Lourdes, Fatima. They did very well in that, and it is to the credit of their very small team, no? Okay, in making it sure that the Philippines and Antipolo Shrine, being the representative of the Philippines, can show to the world that we can host this kind of event in a jiffy with very, very short notice, and they were able to push through with it. And this affirms the CBCP's opinion for me that Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage is the image that is most representative of the Filipino nation. We are not saying that other images in the Philippines, other shrines in the Philippines are not important. Definitely, Our Lady of Perpetual Help is very popular, if not more popular right now. The Shrine of Manawag is very, very popular. But when it comes to its historical, anthropological, and cultural significance for the past centuries, there is no doubt that Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage is tops. Okay, it was already declared as the image that represents the Filipino nation the most, and I tend to agree with that opinion, seeing the shrine there in Washington, D.C. as well. Okay, and that cements this notion, especially now that there's a possibility that the shrine in Antipolo might be elevated even to international shrine status. Okay, but that is something for Our Lady and for the Lord to grant. Okay, so let's not speculate too much. Okay, I'm just informing you that there's now a possibility, or there are petitions on how to have the shrine elevated to that level. By the way, here are the churches, some of the churches that were visited during the pilgrimage season. This includes the San Roque Shrine in Cavite City of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage, the one in Santa Cruz, the one in Silang, Binyan, which is the one known to Rizal, the Manila Cathedral, where the Virgin Mary first stayed in Manila, okay, and usually stays when she is in Manila. And of course, there's another image in Tondo, Manila, wherein she's chosen to be the patroness of the port workers and other people associated with the working masses. So what are the dynamics of the historical pilgrimage season of 2021? Again, one can notice that the shrine defers to IATF and LGU rules and protocol. The very fact that mass pilgrimages were not allowed shows that the shrine is still very conscious of its responsibility regarding public health issues. Social media remains a powerful and alternative sacred space, no doubt about that. While physical attendance was possible, the vast majority of devotees fulfilled their panata via new media platforms. And as even specified by the Father Rector, he noticed that people prayed more through this particular medium. Okay. There is a return of the mobility element thanks to the reverse pilgrimage model. So mobility is there. It might be the direct opposite of a traditional pilgrimage, but it brings the shrine closer to the people and other sacred spaces that share the same Marian character. So I think it's very ingenious on the part of the shrine. And I think this time around, they settled well into the new normal routine. I think shrine authorities and devotees alike had habituated to the semi-quarantined existence. So you know already what to do when you enter. You have to, disinfect. You have to follow social distancing. You have to wear a mask. At that time, we are still required to wear face shields. Okay, no matter how impractical it is, but everybody follows. So to some extent, we have become accustomed to the new normal reality. And there is a return, like in these pictures, there is a return of festal exterior on the part of ritual performances. Now, albeit it is still nothing compared to pre-pandemic pageantry. And I think the most colorful that they could get would be during the procession where the Virgin is offered so many flowers. Of course, the best is given to Our Lady, but the festive color is returning. It's returning slowly, as you can see with these dancers here. So all these side gimmicks, all these side rituals involving color and dances, etc., are returning, but not yet in full mode. And there seems to be now some sort of retrospective character. For some reason, in 2021, the shrine began looking at itself, began to be more introspective and more conscious of its history. In fact, there are so many events held within the pilgrimage season, anniversaries of the crowning, etc., etc. And so you see a shrine developing a more historically conscious stance towards its ministry. And I could not blame them because within a few years, the image and the shrine will be celebrating the 400th year anniversary of the arrival of the image of the Virgin from Mexico to Manila. And that will be a big event. So the question now is, what will be the dynamics of the next pilgrimage season? Now, to be honest with you, it's still a wait and see thing. As of the time of the oral history interview, Father Renante Tolentino was very clear about that. It's a wait and see thing. So far, Lenten season rites, processions are suspended for the moment. There will be Lenten rites, but no processions this Holy Week of 2022. But we don't know what will be the situation come May. So we will expect some announcements probably after the Lenten season. Okay, so what are my conclusions regarding this study, this working study? Number one, and this is something that I've noticed is also shared by other people who wrote papers for the De La Salle Congress last year. The lack of mobility and access to the defined physical sacred space is no hindrance to the continuation of the devotion to the Virgen de la Paz Even Viaje. Definitely, as with the Nazareno, the lack of a sacred space as of the moment does not mean your devotion is lesser. In fact, there seems to be an intensification now that distance is in the process. There's real physical distance and they cannot do that stuff. Somehow people look interiorly at themselves and try to renew or purify why they are devoted to the Virgin of Peace and Glory voyage to begin with. Second, social media is a powerful platform to promote popular devotions like these, especially in the context of new evangelization, something which is highlighted in the research of Kevin Panganiban. Okay, so this one of Kendrick Panganiban. So this one development that is likely to stay even beyond the pandemic. I think even without COVID-19, the emphasis on social media and new media will stay. Now, the conduct and character of these pilgrimage seasons, at least since 2020, I've noticed, is entirely dependent on the ebb and flow of the pandemic. So it is too early to say whether these new normal changes are merely provisional or permanent. Okay? We're not sure if the Biyahe sa Kasaysayan will continue on as a tradition and all the other innovations. It's too early to say. Okay? So as of now, I don't have any answer to this. As of now, the shrine itself has a wait-and-see attitude. Now, as the shrine of the Virgin of Antipolo awaits the 400-year anniversary of the Virgin's arrival in the Philippines and its possible elevation as an international Marian sanctuary, the pandemic cannot stop the current improvements in its defined sacred space. I've noticed that the shrine itself is, it's having physical improvements. They have a lounge, okay? They have now on the pipe organ and all of those stuff. All these things are building up to make the Antipolo shrine more fit as the predominant, Marian sanctuary in the Philippines, as the dominant and the most known Marian sanctuary in the Philippines, and to make it somehow more pilgrim friendly. So in that process, I feel whether the pandemic would continue or not, the changes and improvements in the physical sacred space of Our Lady of Peace and Good Voyage will continue, whether or not the pilgrims would arrive in droves or in trickles. Now, I would like to thank first, and definitely I would like to cite those works that were utilized and were cited in this presentation. So I really owed a lot to these authors regarding my presentation. Of course, there are more, but they will be cited in the actual article, which hopefully will be ready by May. And special thanks to the following individuals who made this research possible. Okay, thank you very much for listening to my talk. I do hope you learned a lot and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.